thank you for coming out in the rain. But the skies are clear. Joe, thanks for coming out to City Lights in downtown Silva to help celebrate the release of this beautiful new novel by Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle. Just a few quick things before we get started. Yes, we are outside, but for the love of your neighbors, keep your mask on and try and maintain some distance from folks that aren't in your regular germosphere. Keep in mind there is a public street running through the middle of this venue, so watch out for traffic. We have 2 public restrooms in the bookstore around the corner to my left, but indoor capacity for visitors is only 9 people at a time. There's another accessible public restroom behind the Chamber of Commerce in the corner of Senior and Main. If, heaven forbid, you get thunder or worsening rain, really our best option is to take shelter in the vehicle. We'll try again on another day. Following Annette's reading here, we'll find books on the cafe's lower patio, to my right. And after the signing, those of you who are of age are invited to dress next door to the paper mill lounge for a reception honoring Annette and her books. If you just go ahead and take this time to silence your phone and get ready to focus on Annette's words. Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, resides with her family just over that ridge, Qualla. She holds degrees from Yale University and the College of William and Mary. Her first novel manuscript, Going to Waters, won the Morning Star Award for Creative Writing from the 2012 Native American Literature Symposium and was shortlisted for the 2014 Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. After serving as Executive Director of the Cherokee Preservation Foundation, Annette returned to teaching English and Cherokee Studies at Wayne County High School. She's the former co-editor of the Journal of Cherokee Studies and serves on the Board of Trustees of the North Carolina Writers Network. You can find her shorter writings in collections going as far back as Night is Gone, Day is Still Coming, in 2003. Still close youth in those days. All the way up until recently, probably most recent being the Wild Sand Field Guide of the Great Smoky Mountains, just out last month. She recently penned a strengthened piece in the last feature on the rigor proactive response to COVID-19 made by the Eastern Band in stark contrast to the reactions seen elsewhere. Her debut novel, Even As You Breathe, was just published at the University Press of Kentucky. The occasion of this celebration of youth. As you listen and look around, 2 kids were mine. We are gathered on land and hold the bones this awful ancestors. While counting stories framed within historical fiction, these mountains and valleys exist beyond time and remind us of the thoughtless words. The past is never dead, not even past. Please join me in a round of applause as we welcome Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle.
Thank you. Welcome to 2020. I really, really appreciate you coming this evening, especially given the circumstances. I am always just humbled by the amount of support that I have in this community. So, before I get too deep, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We okay? Okay. I will continue to speak as if I'm in my classroom. So, yeah, no falling asleep. I started writing this novel when I was working at the Cherokee Preservation Foundation. And I often get asked the question, what led to the story? And there were a few things that kind of came together to begin with. It was right about the time that the movie Monuments Men was coming out. And there was an article in the Asheville Citizen that detailed how the Biltmore House held some of the artwork safe during World War II. And in that article, there was probably just a tiny paragraph that talked about how at the Grove Park Inn they held Axis diplomats as prisoners of war one summer, 1942. And I found that fascinating to think about foreign diplomats who all of a sudden had their citizenship and their loyalties and their trust questioned by the United States. And they were housed in this pinnacle of luxury in Asheville, North Carolina. And while that's fascinating enough on its own, I couldn't help but think about its proximity to Cherokee and how the Cherokee people and all Native people have continuously debated these questions of citizenship and identity, and how times of war have helped to define who gets to be a citizen in this country, and how those questions of identity are answered. So I'm asked usually, where did the idea come from? The idea for this book absolutely came from setting. It came from the fact that a war was going on in 1942, and that a place as prestigious as the Grove Park Inn just became this microcosm of a study of citizenship. And so I began working on it and gave myself a writing prompt. And I went over to the library over here, and I don't know if you have been in there and seen the tiny little room that you can go sit in to write, or do whatever you do in a tiny little room. And I gave myself a writing prompt that was, how much can you write on the most basic thing possible, and how long can you write? So I gave myself the prompt of a bone, of a clean bone. And how long could I write about a clean bone, and what could I say about it? And I was there for a couple of hours, and this book is what I can say about a clean bone, and that's where the story came from. So I wanted to start with the prologue. I've read it a few times at other events, so I apologize if you've heard it before, but I think that it sets up the story, if you haven't read it, the best way possible, so you can get an idea of place and also the main character, County. About the place, when I take you there or when you find it on your own, just know that what the old folks say is true. This land is ours because of what is buried in the ground, not what words appear on paper. But also know this, what is buried in the ground isn't always what you think. It's just the beginning. It's the beginning of the story, the beginning of all of us who call ourselves Homo sapiens. Fitting, I guess, that what I found buried, just as I was trying to figure out how to become a man and still be human, was the very thing that threatened to take it all away. Just when I began to see what taking control of my life might look like, I realized I was not who I thought. Neither was this place. That summer in 1942, when I met her, really met her, before I found myself in a white man's cage and entangled in the barbed wire that destroyed my father, I left the cage of my home in Cherokee, North Carolina. I left these mountains that both hold and suffocate and went to work at the pinnacle of luxury and privilege, Asheville's Grove Park Inn and Resort. I guess I had convinced myself that I could become fortunate by proximities. Escape Uncle Bud's tirades and my grandmother Leishy's empty kitchen cabinets just by driving a couple of hours up the road. It sounded good to tell folks I was raising money for college, but the truth was I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't want to do it there anymore. And if I stayed longer, I would become rooted so deeply I might as well have been planted, might as well have been buried. My plan didn't quite work the way I thought it would. When I got to the resort, I mostly stayed outside, cut the trees, mowed the grass, and helped to dig the holes that would sink signs and posts for barbed wire fences. Music occasionally seeped from the ballroom, but was muted by thick, lead-paned windows before one note ever reached the perimeter of the property. That's where I first found the bone. I was on my hands and knees pitching rocks and digging holes. It was just at the end, like its music was becoming dulled by wartime restrictions and hushed by lead bullets. The prisoners, who were actually diplomats and foreign nationals, treated more like guests, weren't really known to me yet. That little girl, God bless her soul, had barely even stepped foot on the property, and I was still as free as I ever would be. I squatted there by the fence along the boundary of the Grove Park property and grasped the bone by its middle, pointing both ends upward, studying its curvature. A bent bauble for my idle adolescent hands to fidget with in the absence of a ball stick or soldier's rifle. I can't recall playing with many toys as a child. That's probably why the bone spoke poetry to me as a young man. It was smooth and porous, its slight C curve angled in motion, calling to be grasped, used, a weapon, at least in some primitive function of strength, like a subhuman sight, though innately human, maybe even in the very core of humanity. And now, as I recall the moment out loud, it was an embarrassing indulgence of make-believe for a 19-year-old. It's all right to laugh, I don't blame you. Such an extraordinary object to be inside flesh. It was wholly earthen, not sterile or cellular. It was natural in a way we pray our body is not. Momentary, seasonal, destined for expiration. The bone had lost its story, petrified into a mere alkaline deposit, transient and nameless. I was immediately spellbound by this calcified opportunity to embrace a remnant of life's existence in one hand, dust it, preserve it, and listen. Buried by a story, and I was the only one on this earth privileged to hear it. Pounding. It seemed to coo my name like the beautiful girls in my daydreams, the ones who never took interest in boys like me. Just as I was yet to know of a certain beautiful girl's power, I was yet to understand the power that the bone would wield over my life. I was yet to know how much more I would risk for her, for it. I am bits and pieces of the people I meet, my teacher once told me. Though more accurately, I am of the people and places and creatures. And so because of that summer and that war and that small hollow relic, I am bits and pieces of a grand estate and a half-tame primate and a dozen accents and a missing girl and a fearful girl and all the trees and mountains and asphalt in between. And you, well, I reckon you will be too soon enough. Knowing that she is now gone from this earth, all I am left to do is wonder what remains of her here. For me, for anyone who knew or didn't know her, what happens to the memories? How long do they survive? I can still see her dancing, head thrown back laughing. If there's one thing old age has taught me, it's that there are many kinds of love. She taught me that sometimes we feel many different kinds with one person. And now it seems possible that love is the only thing that will outlive us all, but only if we continue to tell its story. It's so nice to see all you people out here in the rain. You know, I'm dealing with just seeing like 5 people at a time max, and they're all well spaced in my classroom and all silent. So this is really nice. All right, I thought I would read another section that I haven't read a whole lot in public. Because you're all local, so you will maybe appreciate this a little bit more. And also, I see my friend Ben Cutler here, who is tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. So Ben wrote the epigraph, the poem that's the epigraph in the novel. I have some pretty talented friends. issues that the book deals with is military service. And for County's father and uncle both served in World War I. At the end of World War I, a really tight timeline. Technically the war was over, but they were still stationed overseas. And then of course the main setting for the book is during World War II. And one thing that a lot of people don't know, although a lot of you probably will, is that Native Americans served in the military at a higher percentage than all other ethnic groups in our country. And so I wanted to capture this dedication to serving the United States, even in times like his father when they were not considered American citizens. And that was something that was really important to me. So this is from chapter 10. I think the only thing I need to tell you is that Lishi is County's grandmother, and this is a little bit of a conversation between them. I handed the crisp clipping to my grandmother along with her reading glasses. I knew she would mimic reading it on her own, but I would need to fill the gaps, tell her the content. Her eyes failed her more and more every day. Her English reading skills were fading even quicker. I see you, she mused. Do you know him? I asked her. Can't make out the name. No, it's faded, but thought you might have heard about someone who was over there. Looks like the last name may start with a C. Tolster, Cornsill, Calhoun, something like that. Sounds familiar, but can't place him. You know we got plenty of boys over there, but some of them come straight out of boarding schools, out west and up north, ready-made soldiers. Hadn't seen them around here in so long I forgot they've grown. Says he survived a death march, but died in a prison camp. Starvation, disease, something like that. A death march. Aren't we all just death march survivors? For heaven's sake, Lishi. She twisted a pale blue dish rag in her hand. I thank the Lord every day that she trailed off. I hated when she said things like that. Does it say who his folks are? No, mostly about all the torture he likely went through. I think most of it is speculation. Says another soldier was with him for part of it, but he escaped from the prison camp, so he didn't know all the details. I turned the page. They included this picture too. Don't think it's him. It's a stock photo they have of another prisoner. Nothing but a sack of bones. I shook my head. They really shouldn't put things like that in the paper. Just awful, she complained. But it's real. I mean, don't you think people need to see what's really going on? I just think about your daddy and uncle, how I worried myself sick with them gone. Your father was about the same age as you are now, and so sensitive to each way the wind blew. And Bud, he was a great deal more patient, but wasn't that much older than your dad. There's got to be a lot of mothers and fathers out there looking at these papers and seeing their youngins' faces on those bodies. Yeah, but weren't you proud with them war heroes and all? Didn't you want to know how brave they were? Well, I didn't know that at the time. In all honesty, I was just surprised your dad made it off. He signed up in one of those fits of restlessness, thought he might change his mind again. Those other things come later, too late really, when nothing else matters, especially not some rusty medal and folded flag. Lishi stood and walked over to the kitchen to pour coffee from the kettle. I guess I should count my stars that at least Bud made it back. Yeah, I agreed unconvincingly. I guess I should have been more thankful too. I mean, Lishi couldn't have raised me alone, but had served a purpose. She would have made an easy trade for my father. He would have made an easy trade for my father. Lishi, tell me the story again. Oh, son, don't you get tired of it? I laughed. You know, it's different every time. Lishi smiled. Okay. She wrapped the dish rag around her coffee cup and nestled herself into a rocking chair by the fireplace. Let's see if I can remember. Lishi had the letters, but she only pulled those out anymore when she was alone in the room. She much preferred to recite from memory, building the story each time she told it. He still seemed like such a boy, even in his uniform. They both did, though Bud has always had this hard edge to him. That's what being the oldest does to you. Your dad, though, he just grinned from ear to ear when we dropped him off at the station. They'd gotten into the war late, really. By the time they finished training, it was practically over. I was grateful for it, to tell the truth. Otherwise, I guess you would be here. At least she closed her eyes. Yes, he was so pleased to finally ship out. I hadn't seen him that happy in a long time. How long until you heard from him? Way too long, a good month or and a half, I believe. But once the first letter came, they seemed pretty steady every week. Sometimes I got 2 in a week. I was getting letters after we buried him. Now I tell you, that's mighty hard to take. Hearing your son's voice about how well he's doing when you already know he ain't coming home. I wanted to ask her why I'd only been allowed to see one of the letters she read to me about Bud being lazy, but I didn't want to upset her or delay her story. At least she stopped and walked over to the stove. She busied herself in making another pot of coffee. You want a cup? Yes, ma'am, I agreed. I needed to hold something warm in my hands. So most of the letters just talked about what things looked like over there. It was like he was on some kind of European holiday, just like the rich folk take. He told me about the other men and where they were from. He'd make fun of Bud. At least she laughed or smiled. I guess Bud wrote similar things. No, Bud never wrote. At least she dropped her smile. He just sent word by your dad that he was okay. I was just thankful that they were stationed together. Otherwise, I guess I would have never heard from Bud. He didn't even write after Dad was killed. Well, in all fairness, he probably didn't have time. The Army was at least good about that. They knew you didn't have a mother, and folks had long been gone. Bud was now the man of the house for us all. The war ended soon after that. They sent him back not long after we received your dad's body. Made it back in time for the sitting up. Let's skip just a little bit here. She continued. Early one morning, the men woke up to the sound of a gunshot. That's what the Army says. I think the rest of the story is that those boys stayed up too late playing cards and maybe even drinking whiskey, and the night watchman fell asleep. So the enemy had no problem sneaking up on them, firing a shot. That does make sense. So our boys start running around, grabbing their weapons, waking everybody up, but nobody can find your dad. Of course, nobody is taking a head count either. They're just trying to stay alive. Bud starts yelling around for him, even goes looking for him, but he's not in his bunk. Did Bud tell you that part? At least she didn't answer. Finally, he hears your dad's voice, but he can't make it out what he's saying. Shouting, really. He's yelling something, but Bud doesn't know what. So Bud follows the shouts and finds your dad standing on the other side of the barbed wire, and for the life of him, Bud can't figure out how he got there and why he crossed the line. And then he sees the body of another American soldier hung in the wire, and your dad's running to him, shielding him from the incoming fire. I know the answer, but I ask anyway. Why was the soldier in the wire? Best they could figure, he was a sleepwalker. He did it a lot, they said. Of course, never got himself into trouble like that, but he must have just walked right into the wire and the barbs woke him up. By the time he was trying to free himself, the enemy had started coming at him. He fired a blind shot. I'm going to skip a little bit more. They ever figure out how Dad got through the wire to the enemy so fast? I mean, without getting caught in the wire himself? No, but it doesn't surprise me. That's just how he was. Your grandpa used to swear that boy would go in a cave and come out of a waterfall clear on the other side of the mountain. I shook my head. I didn't need my father to be any more magical than he already had been built to be. I needed him to exist in the world I lived in, flaws and all. He stood in front of the man and shot at the enemy until he was out of bullets. Then he took the other soldier's gun and shot until he emptied all of his bullets, too. Army said that for sure, said they checked the guns. Lishi pulled another coffee mug from the shelf and started at the kettle. Who did you say found him? Bud got to him first. Lots of men saw him later, but there was too much gunfire. They had to wait until the enemy retreated. And it was too late by then, I finished her story. I knew she wasn't able to. Up until that point, it was like someone else's story, a film she projected. Milk, she asked, holding up a cup. Good for the bones. No thanks, black's fine. I like mine with a little sugar, she grinned. Need all the sweetness I can get. I was glad I had smuggled some from the inn back for her. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
What's leashy mean? Is that a Cherokee word?
Yeah, leashy is the Cherokee word for grandmother, and I play with it a little bit in the book in terms of leashy is it's a name for a maternal grandmother, but in the book, the leashy character, as if it's her first name, is actually County's paternal grandmother, and so I play with that word a little bit in the book. Any other questions? Yes.
Does that ring exist with the door pocket and
Say that one more time.
Does that room exist at the door pocket
Oh.
they went into?
So she's asking about room 447 at the Grove Park Inn. County and Essie spend a lot of time in that room. I have no idea because I keep waiting on them to offer me free stay at the Grove Park. They haven't done it yet. I'm a little upset. I don't know if that is an actual room number there, but one day I'll get over there for vacation. Any other questions? Y'all are so patient. Well, I'm going to read a real short passage. This is one of my favorite. I think that capturing Cherokee humor is really important, so I do my best. I'm not the funniest person on earth, but also Marla asked about the room, and this scene takes place in the room 447. And the room was really important for me to kind of capture a place that County and Essie could spend time away from everybody else and create their own sense of culture within this room. So this is from chapter 14. Weekends at home seemed to lengthen each time I returned. It was a different monotony than that of the inn, filled with familiar faces, familiar chores, and Bud's familiar curses. I missed the inn, its anonymity, the beauty of such opulent structure, Lee's jokes, and most of all, Essie. In truth, the only real draw home was Leeshy. I worried about her, unsure if Bud was reliable enough to drive her to church or restock her firewood for the stove. After a few weekends of finding Leeshy well-fed and agreeable to accepting rides from longtime neighbors, I was content to remain in Asheville for the balance of the summer, mostly to spend more time with Essie. I did miss Cherokee when I was at the inn, enough to make me question if I'd ever find a place I was truly happy. Each held something for me that the other did not. Instead of making the drive home after work on Friday and back to the inn on Sunday, I chose to remain at the inn 7 days a week. Essie and I spent hours in 447, playing dominoes, reading in silence, or daydreaming out loud together. Occasionally, we joined others on day trips off property if the weather was nice, but nothing more than a half-hour drive away. We retreated to the room so often that the evenings fused into one long moment. There are snapshots of that summer, literal and otherwise, that refuse to fade, not because they are fantastic or even significant, but because they are elemental to what is now my existence. Maybe what was Essie's too. Essie was likely the most proper girl I had ever met, and most certainly the most sophisticated girl from Cherokee. She fit into 447 like one of the first edition novels we found there. And because she fit, I fit by association, adopted into some modern clan by the clan mother herself. Mind you, that is where the maternal instincts began and ended. Essie corrected no more than my grammar on occasion. Quite the opposite, really. She led me to dangle on the edge of complete and utter failure, spin wildly in the awkwardness of it, dancing in delight of my blush. Go ahead, cow pie, I'll spot you, she encouraged. And before I remembered who I was, I found myself upside down, attempting to walk across the length of the room on my hands. I crashed gleefully into the couch, unable to spare my breath from laughter's thievery. Essie, too, was unable to remain on her feet, overcome with amusement. She sank into the oversized leather chair and vibrated in a nearly silent wheezing laughter until the clearest expression of the word squirrel eased from her. I sat straight up, imagining that a varmint had joined our evening revelry. She too sat erect, but she was blushing, eyes wide and hand over her mouth. Squirrel, I repeated. Where? Essie didn't answer. Her eyes fell. It was clear that I had not actually heard what I thought I had. Did you just... She didn't move. Essie stammered. Did you just pass him? Cowpie, shut your mouth. You did. Hush. You did. County Sequoia, one does not speak like that to a lady. Well, most ladies don't speak through the backside. She fell into herself, howling loudly. I know, right? I couldn't help it. You got me so tickled. It sounds just like you said squirrel. Or maybe like you said squirrel. I couldn't finish. I convulsed in the joy of her humanity. Stop it, Cowpie. You keep this up and I'll call up a whole mess of squirrels. An out-and-out scurry. Scurry of squirrels. Essie was always teaching me new words, most of which she likely found on the shelves of 447. My favorite word, though, of all the fancy, sophisticated, highfalutin words, was cowpie. I know it sounds strange that I would want an attractive girl like Essie calling me a pile of cow manure, but even cow pies attract beautiful butterflies, delicate and indifferent to the stench of refuse.